Shame for me personally, the way that I would describe it, it keeps you stuck because it's a feeling of defeat. Like you're disappointed in something that you've done or something that happens to you, and it's hard to move past it. So when you're stuck in shame, you're stuck in that place.
Shame comes from so many different places, whether it's family or religion or sexuality. Each individual deals with it differently.
I think when you keep it to yourself, you're giving it power that it doesn't need. And then all of a sudden when you say it and it's known, that power kind of goes away.
A lot of the times we don't challenge our thoughts. We think just because the thought came to our mind, then that thought is true. But sometimes having other people around, they can help you challenge that thought if you can't do it yourself.
It is hard to open up and say the things that you are shameful about. And I think that that's natural because it's like you want people to see the best in you.
Vulnerability is a skill that you can learn. It's something that you can learn how to be more, and it's really challenging at first.
Something recently happened to me at work, which I told her about, and I felt really just like frustrated and like embarrassed that it had happened. I can't keep stuff like that to myself or it eats me alive, and like I need someone who like understands me to get it out so that I don't like harbor that feeling.
You're listening to the Rule of Life podcast from Practicing the Way. In each season, we explore an ancient practice from the way of Jesus and its relevance for the modern era. This is Season 7, Community.
Hey friends, welcome back to this season of the Rule of Life podcast, which is all about community. My name's Shelbi, I'm your host. I'm joined today by John Mark, and we're talking all about shame today.
Yeah. I
With
feel
a
like
big
I just want to
smile
say,
on my
hi, I'm doing great. I'm like, oh, yes.
Yes, shame. Okay, so we did a whole session on the practice on shame, and now we're doubling down. We're doing an episode on the podcast. Why both?
You know, in session 3 of the practice, we kind of shift gears to, all right, we have this vision of living in community as a fictive kinship group.
Sounds
where you
so
know
idealistic.
And know. It sounds idealistic
Yeah.
and beautiful. And yeah, there's a cost, but okay.
Sure.
But, you know, we kind of start to transition into, okay, real life. This is actually really hard.
Yep.
And there are a lot of obstacles. There are reasons that most of us don't live in a group like that.
Yeah.
And live as radical individual, kind of autonomous people going about our consumeristic lives. There's reasons for that.
Yeah.
And so we start to name the challenges that we face in community. I named 4 or 5 at the beginning of this session. You know, busyness. Most of us are just don't have margin. Relationships take a lot of time. Transience, you know, the world's particular for certain types of people are so transient. You might have an amazing community group for 9 months and then
someone moves.
half of them move away or somebody moves. Yeah. Digital distraction, you know what I mean? It's hard to even be together with our phones in our pockets and how that's kind of miswired our brain.
Yeah.
And, you know, decreasing emotional intelligence because of the breakdown of the family and the fallout of the sexual revolution. I mean, there's all sorts of these kind of powerful forces inside and outside.
Yeah.
But then I basically just say, even if we could wipe all of that off the map, if you were Amish and, you know, or you can imagine a world with no iPhone and no TikTok and no Instagram and no busy career and no city noise, still, we will face, when we step into community, the most ancient challenge of all, which the writer of Genesis names as shame. So there's this fascinating line that I first began to notice with Curt Thompson that we'll have on in a few minutes. In Genesis chapter 2, so if you know the Genesis story, there's this opening kind of frame of creation before the fall and human beings in the garden with God. And then chapter 3 is, you know, called by theologians the fall or original sin. It's when sin comes into the human story. The literary seam between those two stories is this one iconic line: Adam and Eve were both naked and they felt no shame. And it's this beautiful picture of life before sin, of intimacy, vulnerability, connection, beauty. But that is such a fascinating end to the sentence. And they felt no shame.
Right.
think of all the things the author could have said. They felt no anxiety. They felt no fear. They felt no depression. They felt no anger. They felt no resentment. They felt no wounding. His one-word choice is shame, which means simultaneously it's the author's one-word summary of all that comes after the fall.
Wow.
So sin is the cause, but shame at some level is the result. And so there is this deep, primal enemy that, as you see in that Genesis story, sabotages relationships of love.
Wow.
And if we don't attend to and attune to the shame that is lurking inside and outside all of us and deforming every relationship we touch like a contagious disease, then we will never reach deep, loving connection with other people.
Wow. So even if we got all of those other obstacles in check, we're still left with this.
Yes.
Talk to me about how you draw on your pastoral experience here. How have you seen this impacting how people show up in community?
Well, if you go back to the Genesis story, so Adam and Eve were naked and they felt no shame. Chapter 3, verse 1, the serpent comes, deception, sin comes into the story. And then in the story, what happens? They begin to hide. Right. So they sew, fig leaf.
They literally cover up.
It's such just a powerfully symbolic story. They hide from God and distance from each other. And then they begin to blame each other. It's like the woman you gave me, And so that's what shame does. So shame is a disconnector. It disconnects us from God, from other people, and from our own souls, where we can't even actually face the reality of who we are, what we've done, because the shame is too powerful. Shame won't let us look at ourselves honestly anymore. So then we become alienated from ourselves and live at this surface level, but actually controlled by deep primal energies that ruin our life and wreak havoc in our behavior. And then they cause us to blame and wound each other, hurt each other. So shame is both the byproduct of sin, but it's also the cause of a lot of sin.
Wow.
Meaning it causes us to behave toward people in ways that break and disconnect loving connection.
The community practice is designed to be run in your church, small group, or community. It combines teaching, conversation, and spiritual exercises, all designed to help you cultivate community in the way of Jesus. If you come on the community practice, you will have the opportunity to learn and practice 4 key skills for life in community to help form you into a person of love. The community practice is completely free, thanks to the generosity of our friends in the circle and other givers. Available now at practicingtheway.org.
So shame is a universal experience.
Yes.
None of us can escape it. And I think that there's 2 responses that we gravitate towards. One, I think we get from the culture we live in, which is if I can just confront my inner critic and make her more positive, if I can just get more positive thoughts, vibes, whatever
I
that
call it
is.
like the Peloton theory. You know what I mean? Just you're a boss, you're a queen, you're a king, you're perfect just the way you are. You're strong, you're beautiful. It's just positive affirmations.
Go into Aries, stand in the mirror and read all of the affirmations. Just more of that, So that's one response. And then the second response I think we can get from our, being involved in or growing up in the church, which is I can maybe try to just bulldoze my way through shame with right belief, right teaching, truth. Maybe that'll be enough to
if I listen to enough sermons on the atonement, then if I really memorize Romans chapter 8, there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ, then I am free of shame.
Exactly. Because I think, in the church, sometimes it seems like the thing that gets preached is we're in Christ. There's no room for shame. There's no more shame. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about
Which is true theologically.
Yes.
But it is not true experientially for most people.
That's it.
Yeah, we live with residual shame deep in our bodies. Shame at its core is a fear. It's actually worse than what we often hear. It's not just a fear that we are bad. It's a fear that if people knew us as we actually are, they would reject us. And we would lose loving connection. We'd lose family.
Yeah.
That's the deepest, because we are bad. That's the deepest fear there is at some level in a human being. I think more than death.
So talk to me more about why those responses don't cut it. What's going on?
I mean, there's a place for both of them. Certainly there's a place for preaching on the atonement.
Of course. Yeah, we don't.
Even, I'm sure, some place in particular for people who didn't get an empowering message from their mom or dad for positive affirmations. Okay, sure. But neither of them really work to heal the deep roots of shame. And that's because they don't penetrate deep enough into our brains and our bodies. Shame is at some level like a physiological response to our experience. And so there's a thinker by the name of Dr. Todd Hall, who's a friend of mine, a psychologist from Rosemead, and beautiful follower of Jesus, and really sharp thinker. And he's helped me to understand more about how there are these kind of two levels of belief that we all live at, what a psychologist would call explicit belief and implicit belief.
Okay.
So explicit beliefs are the beliefs that we choose to believe, that we think we believe, that we believe we believe. You know, we go out and we research some Christian doctrine and we read books about it and listen to sermons about it and we read all the biblical passages and we make up our own mind and we choose a belief and we say, I believe in ... That's an explicit belief. And it's really powerful because explicit beliefs form the mental maps by which we navigate reality.
Sure.
And so I have an explicit belief about marriage and sexuality, and that it's a covenant, not a contract, and that to death do us part. And that shapes how I live. It's why I'm still in my marriage decades in, right? So explicit beliefs are really important. Most Christian preaching and teaching is all operating at the explicit level.
Okay.
But implicit beliefs are actually often just as or more formative, and they drive much of our most self-destructive and self-sabotaging behavior. So implicit beliefs are the beliefs, the narratives, truths, or lies that are in our body, deep, deep, deep in our body, that we often don't even have access to at an explicit level. We're unaware. We don't even know we believe it. And so, you know, attachment theory, for example, will point out how when certain people's caregivers are not present to them consistently in a loving and attuned way, they will often develop a coping mechanism to that lack of loving connection in their earliest years called avoidant attachment, which is just a broad kind of category, lots of variations of it. And the broad kind of pattern is you deal with the fear of rejection, which is now we're into shame territory, by pre-rejecting. So you will kind of reject someone before they can reject you as a coping mechanism.
Or they even have a chance to.
And almost nobody does this at a conscious level.
Right.
So if you're friends with people that this is their particular struggle, you'll often have this really beautiful, emotional, intimate moment with them, connection. You might have an amazing meal or have this incredible confessional kind of moment. And then all of a sudden they just kind of ghost you for a month. You're like, we just had this amazing connect. What happened?
Right.
And it's not like they're sitting around thinking, how do I hurt this person or wound this person or break connection with this person? They're probably not even thinking about it at all. There is some deep belief in their body that if I'm intimate with another person, I am not safe. And that begins to sabotage the very thing they ache for and were made for.
Wow.
And I'm talking about us, right? And so that's one pattern. There are multiple. And those are just broad categories. So this is where implicit belief cannot be healed through reading a book about shame, listening to a sermon about shame, doing biblical research on the key passages on shame. That's all important. That's all at the explicit level. The implicit shame lives at an implicit level, where even if my mind believes, there's no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. I am loved. I mean, how many people believe in the love of God and do not believe in the love of God?
Right.
So they don't feel the love of God. They don't trust the love of God. They don't live from the love of God. And it's not because they have heretical theology. It's because they're implicit. Their explicit mind is an Orthodox Christian. Their implicit gut is an atheist heretic.
Yeah. Wow.
And a lot of discipleship is about closing that gap, healing that.
Integrate.
And that happens in relationships through community, not through Western style learning.
I think that's the perfect spot to segue into what's next. So when we decided to extend our conversation on shame from the practice to the podcast, it was obvious that there was one person that we needed to sit down with, and that person is Dr. Curt Thompson. Dr. Thompson is a psychiatrist, speaker, author who has aimed his life at helping people form deep relationships and live fully integrated lives. He's the author of Anatomy of the Soul and the Soul of Shame, and through extensive research and practice, he has become an expert on the topic of shame, what it is, and how we heal from it. Here's John Mark and Dr. Thompson.
Curt, you have thought so deeply and well about the nature and the contours of shame, and you offer such a unique perspective, both as a psychiatrist and as a follower of Jesus. I think maybe first question would just be, what prompted you to write an entire book on this? Like, what was the motivating factor for you to spend, I would imagine, years of your life really thinking deeply about this one particular aspect of the human condition?
I think I was writing the first book that I wrote, Anatomy of the Soul, which is this integration of neuroscience and spiritual formation. And in the middle of that, it started to dawn on me that the thing that is making this integration, this living wholly, this sanctification that we Christians would call this way of being, beauty and goodness in the world, the thing that really interferes with it at every turn is this thing that happens. It happens in the office between me and patients. It happens in groups that we were running. It happens in our kitchens, and this experience of shame. But then you also open the texts of Scripture, and there it is, right out of the chute. The Hebrew writers are not wasting any time. So I think for me, it became this almost undeniable awareness that this is the thing. That at every turn, this is the thing that we're addressing when it comes to how it is that people find it so difficult to live the life that we even claim that we want to live as Jesus followers. So the first thing that we would say is that shame is a signal. It's a neurophysiological signal that we pick up, and it is telling us that there's something wrong. There's something that's off. And by wrong or bad, these are all words that we only find afterwards, because long before that, I felt the shame in my chest. I feel it in my face.
Yes.
I turn away from you. Like literally, we will turn away from people. It is a turning in. I will turn my gaze down. I will turn my shoulders in. I will turn my body away from you. There is a turning away from. And I'm ashamed. I can't think creatively. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to be in the room with you because I'm too afraid of finding your gaze, finding mine. There is a turning away from me to you, and there's a turning away from within me of other parts of me.
Meaning there's like almost an incoherence that comes into our brain or our mind. We begin to get scattered, confused, disintegrated.
Human beings can sense this as early as 15 to 18 months of age. Long before we have language, long before I have the capacity to understand why I feel ashamed, something's happening. And the problem for us then is not just that I feel it. Remember, shame as a signal is important.
Yes.
There are human behaviors that we engage in for which the proper response should be shame. There are things that we do for which we should be ashamed of that we are often not ashamed of because we've kind of unburdened ourselves from it in some respects. So it's not a matter of like, we shouldn't ever feel ashamed. It's a matter of how do we respond to it when we do? And what are the circumstances in which that takes place?
Dr. Thompson, I've read before that shame is a social emotion. I think I was taught in church, come from a tradition where people would distinguish between shame and guilt. Shame is about who you are. Guilt is about what you do. I'm not sure if that framing is the most helpful. I've read some more recent people that argue, no, there's healthy shame and then there's toxic shame. And, often those two things get lumped together. But I've read that shame is a social emotion that is rooted at some level in fear. And the moment I read that, it made a lot of sense because I noticed, like you said a few minutes ago, shame, you feel it in your chest, you feel it in your cheeks. And I will notice the same thing. My cheeks get red, the top of my head gets hot. And I realize it feels almost indistinguishable from fear to me. Is shame not ultimately just a sense of I'm bad, but also a fear of loss of connection with other people, or am I misunderstanding your work?
No, I think John Mark, you're absolutely right. One of the differences between fear and shame is that with fear, there are things I have options. You hear of fight or flight. I have some options. With shame, all I have is the turning away.
Wow, because you can't change who you are in that moment.
No. And even if I turn away from you, If you are a large mammalian cat and you want to have me for lunch, if I can get away from you, I can be afraid, but I can leave and my fear reduces. I'm good if I'm so lucky. If I feel shame from you, I may turn away from your gaze and I take the shame with me. There isn't a way for me to necessarily take care of this on my own. My shame tells me that there's something that is so not okay with me that at some point you're going to leave. You're going to see this over here, and you're going to go.
You're going to see who I actually am, how deeply broken I am, and you're going to reject me, abandon me,
you're going to leave. Right. You're going to leave, and you're going to leave me with me. And so I don't have a way to heal me from me. My sense is, and again, I don't claim expertise in this, but my sense is that shame is the ultimate neuroaffective overlay of what we call sin, right? It is the emotional partner. This is how, and no wonder how often when we talk about sin in the Bible, so often shame is associated with it. You mentioned earlier, and this is helpful. I think it's not unimportant. There is a difference between shame and guilt in the sense that even developmentally, children, as we said, can start to sense this thing that we call shame very early, 15 to 18 months of age. The thing that we call guilt, that we typically would say humans experience, doesn't really start to emerge in conscious awareness of a kid until they're somewhere between about 4 to 6 years of age.
Interesting.
And it requires the development of the prefrontal cortex that gives a child a greater sense of differentiation. There's me and there's you. And not only that, but when I do something and I notice that it's not just something wrong, but it is wrong because I can picture you being upset with me.
Right. It has a relational impact on me.
Totally.
Yep.
It's not just this abstract thing that we call wrong, and that's why I feel guilty. I'm like, because no, John Mark said I'm not supposed to do, my dad said I'm not supposed to do this. I did this, and so forth. And when this happens, this is what's so interesting about the data. When you look at when people have what we call the experience of guilt, because a person has done something that has wounded a relationship with somebody that matters to them, one of the first things that those folks will typically tend to do is move toward them in order to say, I'm sorry, will you forgive me?
Interesting.
I have some
guilt,
agency.
In a healthy version, moves us toward the relational breach.
Right.
But you're saying shame.
With shame,
moves
I don't
us
do that.
Away.
I won't do that, which is me. Like, no wonder we need a God who will come and find us.
Yes.
because all my attempts to find him are still rooted in a shame-driven posture toward relationship. I'm doing this because I've got to be good enough because the part of me that believes that I'm not.
Now, you write about how shame is not just the byproduct of sin, or almost like I think you used the language earlier of a neurological affect, this kind of discoloring in our spirit from shame. But you write about how it's also the cause of sin in our life. Can you tell us more about that?
For me, you read that story of Adam and Eve, and when I imagine that conversation that the serpent is having with the woman, if we have a relationship here between the woman and the man and their God that is whole, the reality is that I don't really, if I'm her or I'm Adam, I don't really have any reason to be eating any fruit unless something happens between me and somebody else before I do. If things are really this good, I've got no reason unless something starts to happen within me. And I'm aware that libraries have been filled, sermons written, theology spoken about pride, what we all mean by that. When you look at the notion of arrogance, arrogance is a coping strategy for shame. It is a direct way, the pride that we talk about in the scriptures that is of the kingdom of darkness, that kind of pride. We see this in patients all the time, that our arrogance is a way for me to cope with the part of me that believes I am unwantable. And when we start to, you look at the conversation between the woman and the serpent, there is this sense in which, the writers are just so brilliant. At one level, the serpent wants to talk about God, while at the other level, allowing the woman to draw conclusions about herself. At one level, we can say, God's not the kind of God that really wants to share things with you. He won't let you have the fruit, etc. Which, of course, the message is you're not really worth nearly as much as you think you are. What? It's not just what kind of a God wouldn't share things. It's a matter of what kind of a person would this God not share things with?
What's wrong with you?
Exactly. And this happens at cocktail parties, right? These conversations, this happens in elder board meetings where, we think we're just talking about something when really we're delivering messages to people around the table about themselves. Because I don't know how to cope with my own shame, and so I'm going to help you share some of that with me.
Are you saying that shame causes us, that shaming other people is almost some likely subconscious most of the time, but coping mechanism for our own shame?
Every time I shame somebody else, it's always a way for me to cope with myself. When I'm mad at my kid and I say something, unfortunately, I have too many memories of this, right? Of when I've said something to one of my two children in a way that is disdaining, in a way that is, hurtful. It is because in that moment, I cannot cope with me. It is me that doesn't feel adequate enough as a dad to be patient enough, to have a non-anxious presence, to be curious. Instead, in my own sense that I'm not enough, this is what I give to them.
And your kids are close enough to your ego, they're mirroring back to you your own sense of failure and your own shadow side that now is walking around in somebody else's legs.
Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be my kid. It could be the person who cuts me off in traffic.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm upset because actually I'm late because I left the house 20 minutes late. You know how this works. And now I
have no idea what you're talking about, but theoretically it makes sense as a concept.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, I don't know if this is the right language, but healing from shame or moving out of shame. What are next steps? Is it relational next steps? And talk to us about that.
We flourish as relational creatures. We are wounded relationally. We are shamed relationally. We heal. We are regenerated. We are reconciled. We are saved relationally. Part of our wounding and the shame that emerges from it also changes the way that we necessarily anticipate how my saving should come about, which means I'd like to be saved. I just don't want to have people be involved in the process. And so the very thing that I most deeply long for is the thing that I'm also most terrified of.
Yes.
So we can't learn to swim by reading about it on the internet. We have to actually get in the pool. And so one thing I would say is that it does require our being willing. There is risk. It's not easy. It's not complicated, but it's not easy. Our risk to enter into one relationship. Is there one relationship that we can choose? We can say, I would love to tell you my story. What would it be like for me to tell you my story? There are some ways to go about doing that, about how do we tell our story and so forth. So there are tactics for that. But the only way that I'm going to know my shame to be resolved is if I tell you my story, and as I sense my shame, I sense you coming closer.
Yes.
I don't sense you turning away. I sense you being curious and coming closer. This sense that I want to be in the room with your shame so that you can see me seeing it, and then you can see me disregarding your shame and seeing you. I'm not dismissing your shame. I'm not ignoring it. We're not pretending it doesn't exist. In fact, it's like, bring it on. I want you to hear me hearing all about your shame. And then I want you to watch me stay right where I am and come for you. And to say, gosh, this must be awful to have carried this for so long. You watch people's entire bodies start to change when they have the felt sense of being seen, and while their shame is still at full throttle, and then you watch them become calm as they start to pay more attention to the one who's gazing upon them than they are paying attention to their shame.
Wow.
And this is what we have good evidence to indicate that what's happening is the birth of new neural network activity in your brain. So this is like new mind that is being created in the very presence.
Being created through a relational interaction, not through reading a book or listening to a podcast on your morning run, but through sitting in a room, naming your sin and shame to another person. Right. The new mind of Christ is being, I just want to understand it clearly. It is body to body healing. This sense that our bodies are just so crucially important. And this is how, Jesus doesn't just say, like, y'all are saved. I mean, there's this sense that he's going to spend every last ounce of his body. Yes.
For the purpose of coming for us.
A mentor of mine who has been deeply impacted by AA, we were chatting a while back, and he said, the way that modern Protestants practice confession is they say sorry to God in the privacy of their own mind, often while they are kind of filing forward at church to receive the Eucharist. And he said that's certainly not a bad thing. But, when James is writing about confession, it's explicit, not implicit. Confess your sins to one another, that you may be not forgiven, healed, right? And he said that biblical confession is more like what happens in an AA meeting, where you sit down, hi, my name's Curt, my name's John Mark, whatever, I'm an alcoholic. And then you tell your story of just royally screwing up 4 days before. That's right. And he said, the reason that AA is often more transformative than even Eucharist at church is because it's actually closer to the biblical practice of confession.
Right.
And I just think that imprinted really deeply on me. And again, he was not saying, don't go to church and say sorry to God in your mind or pray the liturgy. He was saying, you need to actually name the reality of your life to another person.
We like to say that the body operates bottom to top and right to left. First we sense, and then we make sense of what we sense. And it happens in that order. And so here's the thing. When I confess to God, my entire body is not involved. When I confess
when you hear a sermon talking about how you are forgiven in Christ, atonement theory, your entire body is not involved.
No.
True as it may be.
And my forgiveness, my sense of being forgiven, it begins with my body. It begins with me feeling this. And so with the group of men that I meet with every Tuesday morning for confession and prayer, this is one of the primary things that happens is I need to hear from these men every week the thing that I've been forgiven, because they continue to show up for me. And it is they're not leaving the room that has me hopeful and inspired that, I'm much more connected to them and to myself. I'm much less ashamed, and I'm therefore much more likely to live the way I actually want to live this week than I was last.
Yeah, that's a powerful threshold moment, I think, in the spiritual journey, when you stop expending energy to hide from other people who you really are, and you switch that energy to go out, seek out people that you love and trust and that are trustworthy and love you to show who you really are.
When I think about the deterrent for me in confessing, most of the time, all it is I don't want them to know what I did. And the reason is shame. And shame is the belief that what I've done reveals something about who I am. Shame for me is the guardian at the door saying, well, no, keep the windows closed, keep the door shut. They can see from the outside, but don't let them see inside. And I think as I've been with these guys in confession for the last 5 years, one of the things that's shifted for me is that when I confess, I am confessing the darkness of what I've done, but in so doing, I'm revealing the light of who I am. And I've challenged myself and felt challenged by the Spirit to think about it as a light and good practice, because it is the opportunity to reveal something untrue about me and then to receive the truth about who I am spoken by a brother.
And that's all that confession is, to me anyway. It's just revealing the truth of where I am. Not who I am, it's not all I am, but it's just where I've been. The hiding for me at a profound level started in my 20s, and that went on for years and years and years, and even into my marriage. The truth came out and allowed me to say things I thought I would never say to a brother or my wife. And that was the most liberating thing. It was a death, because I was no longer the person they thought that I was. Honestly, they probably didn't think I was that person anyway, for all kinds of reasons. But I realized before them, I didn't have to pretend any longer. We hunkered down together. We went through this season of about 6 months of really intense time of really practicing the way of being known in our sin and our weakness. It just opened up an avenue of being known in some pretty dark places in our life that allowed us to overcome shame to the point where we started confessing our sin to each other every single day. And that's continued for almost 5 years.
Basically, how we've set up our confession group is it's a group text string, and we use the letters Y and N. Y means, yes, I'm doing well. I feel like I'm in good standing with the Lord. N means, no, something's up. I have something to confess. And so there's 2 letters. The first is for yourself. How are you doing? Yes, I'm doing great. N, I'm not doing well. The second letter is for your relationships. You put our Y and N for that category too. And so if someone in the group texts a NY, then someone else in the group would they'd volunteer to give that person a call. Basically, the person that, signaled I'm not well, they will confess what happened, and the person listening will receive their confession and then offer prayer for them. And it's honestly that simple. It's basically hearing the confession and then partnering with that person in prayer, bringing it to the Father, and extending mercy on behalf of each other.
I think I had my first transformational experience with confession when I was in college. I remember thinking, there's something about what's happening inside of me that does not match up with the image that other people see of me. And then at some point that became, I can't keep doing this. And it became exhausting. It became exhausting to kind of try to keep making sure that people saw what I wanted them to see around me. And so I remember I had a conversation with my dad and very nervous about that. And so I shared with him some things that happened to me as a child and some implications of that through my upbringing into my college years. And the way that he just immediately started weeping And then he like grabbed my hands and said in the coffee shop, I've never loved you any less, and I can never love you anymore. And I don't know what any of this means, but I want to walk with you through it. And it just has radically changed everything for me. And now as I think about confession, I think about confession is not just sin management. It's not even close to sin management. Confession is the desire and belief and goal of living without secrets in your life. The Spirit is the one who is uprooting sin in my life. If I could have stopped sinning, I already would have.
Right. Yep.
I promise you that, but I can't, and I need help. And so confession is the way that I partner with the Spirit to uproot this sin in my life. Because if I can't control my sin, I can control my secrets. And so confession for me is the practice of choosing to live a life without secrets.
I would say if I could graduate from sin, then I wouldn't need confession anymore. And because I know that's not true, confession will always need to be part of my life as long as I follow Jesus. And the conviction behind that is I know what it's like not to be known and how isolated and lonely and scary that is. And the difference, even though it's still hard and I still have to fight my shadow side every time I confess, I have to fight the shame. I have to fight that feeling of self-preservation and wanting to project a certain image. I have to fight all of that and die to myself. The reward of that is something that can't really be put into words. It's just a whole different way of living. And I've tasted enough of that to know that that's what I want.
So John Mark, if I'm tracking, I think it's clear that shame is an experience that follows sin. So what is it that we need to understand about the experience of sin in order to get to the root of shame and experience the healing?
Well, I think we need a full biblical theology of sin.
Mhm.
So in biblical theology, there's not one, but 3 dimensions to sin.
Okay.
There's sin done by us, which is the most obvious category, you know, where you are the perpetrator, you say something stupid, you do something stupid, you do something wrong, right? Then there's sin done to us, where you are the victim, you are wounded and hurt, and all of us, and that will really sabotage relationships of love. Hurt people,
right,
as the saying goes.
Yeah.
And then there's sin done around us, which is just, it's like the moral equivalent or relational equivalent of secondhand smoke. Nobody would hold you guilty in a court of law, but it will still give you lung cancer to live in the sexual immorality of LA, or to live in the greed of New York City, or the fill in the dominant God or sin of your cultural context.
Okay.
Evangelical Christians often focus on dimension 1 when they talk about the atonement of Jesus and sin done by us. Therapeutic secular culture often focuses on dimension number 2, sin done to us, right?
Yep.
And almost nobody talks about dimension number 3.
I don't know if I've ever heard people talk about it. Yeah.
When you hear people talk about it is when there's been a national moral failing.
Okay.
So Germans after World War II, South Africans after apartheid, Rwandans after the genocide. That's when you hear people start to talk about shame. Actually comes up in a lot of racial justice conversations, where people on either the victim or the perpetrator side carry shame in their body, not for something they directly did, but their ancestors did. That's, okay, now we're talking about implicit shame from sin done around us. So my point is, shame exists in all 3 of these dimensions. Shame is not just the feeling we have when we do something wrong. It's a feeling we have when something wrong is done to us, and even when something wrong is done around us. And so we need a holistic, robust view of sin in order to feel wholly and robustly the shame that comes from it.
And all 3 of those things, the sin I've done, the sin done to me, the sin happening around me, it's hard to talk about. It's hard for that stuff to come to the surface.
Absolutely.
Parker Palmer he describes the soul like a shy wild animal. And so you have to create an environment in order for the soul to feel safe to emerge. I think it's similar when it comes to shame, especially when it's living so deep within us. There has to be an environment in order for that stuff to begin to surface. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what are the key ingredients to creating that environment so that shame can come to the surface and we can begin to do that work of healing?
Yes. Well, if shame at some level is a manifestation of fear, specifically that people will reject us and abandon us and break connection with us because we are bad, then it's going to require a relational context of trust.
Right.
And trust is the imprint left by experience. And in this case, the experience necessary is one of safety. So you need to know, you need to believe, trust that this person I'm going to be in relationship with or let my hair down and be myself with or confess my sin to is a trustworthy person that is going to, one, stay with you and not bail on you when they see you as you actually are. That is, two, going to have compassion on you. So our culture, therapeutic, secular culture, loves to talk about non-judgment.
Yes.
But that comes out of like a postmodern, there's no right, there's no wrong, you do you. So as Christians, we're like, kind of want to be not judgmental. We kind of also want to judge between right or wrong. So I think the more biblical Jesus word is compassion.
It's helpful.
Where you can look honestly at the sin in your own life or the sin in a brother or sister's life, at sin done by you, done to you, and done around you. And you can hold it not so much non-judgmentally, but compassionately. What's the beautiful saying? Be gentle because everyone you know is fighting a great battle.
Yeah,
something
good.
like that. And everyone you know is fighting a great battle, not the least of which is with shame.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about confession. So, you know, my journey with it, for a long time, it was just, I stayed in that, you know, sin I've done. Every once in a while, I experience an acute moment. I become aware of that. I'm like, okay, I'm going to confess that to the Lord maybe right before I take communion or whatever the thing is going on. And it stayed up for a long time in this space between just me and the Lord, you know. But now I'm in a space where I'm starting to practice confessing one to another. Talk to me about why is it so important for it to be regular, a regular rhythm of confession? And why does it need to move from the vertical to the horizontal?
Yeah, well, it's certainly a both and. And we were talking about that with Dr. Thompson about how beautiful it is when we say sorry to God in the privacy of our own mind at church or in the Anglican liturgy, and how insufficient and how much more powerful it is when you notice and you name your sin done by you or to you or around you to another loving, trustworthy person. There's just a power there that we do not get inside the confines of our own mind and imagination. But I think the regular thing is really important. You know, with confession, you're not just naming the truth about what you did wrong. You're naming the truth about who you are, you know, like and who you want to become in Christ, which is often not the kind of person that does what you did.
Right.
And you're naming like the true undercurrents of your heart. I mean, so often I didn't sin, but it's not because my heart was right. It's just because the circumstances weren't right or, you know. And it's like, oh, wow, there's a deep heart, call it temptation, that is in me. And so the regular practice of confession to another person. So first off, to another person, you exponentially multiply the power. Regular, what you begin to do is you don't just name the really bad things you did ad hoc when it's so bad, then you feel so guilty or feel so much shame that you have to talk to a person to alleviate shame. You begin to get to the root not just of your bad behavior, but what is causing your bad behavior. As you begin to name, like you come somewhat from the Wesleyan tradition. I want to ask you about that in a minute. And I've been studying a lot Wesley and his discipleship bands. I just started one recently with two other guys. And we've augmented Wesley's, is it 5 questions? 5 or 6 questions?
Yes.
And, you know, there are questions about, did you sin this week? You're supposed to meet weekly with your band, but also where were you tempted to sin? And I find that that's a really powerful question.
Yeah.
Not just where did you mess up, but where were you tempted to mess up? And then that unlocks all sorts of other questions. Why? Why does that temptation keep coming up? And Why did you say no to it this time? Or why did you say yes to it? What were the conditions that caused you to sin or to not sin? Like you begin to pay attention to all of this stuff. So tell me more about that. Tell me, you're in a discipleship band. You said that the other day, and I was like, oh, I just started one. You've been in it for a while. For people listening, we put that in the session. What is a discipleship band and how that dovetails into confession?
Yes. So discipleship band, it's newer to me too, just within the last handful of months. But it's basically, I meet regularly with 2 other girls, so small group of people.
It's not like a rock band.
It's not a rock band.
It's like,
different kind of band.
You said that over dinner last night. You're like, yeah, I'm in a band. And I was like, whoa, you play music? And you're like, no. I confess my sins to a few people. Right. Different kind of band.
Little different.
A Wesleyan band.
Yes, a Wesleyan band. So yeah, we get together for 1 hour every single week, and we go through a set of questions. How is it with your soul? What are your struggles and successes? What are you hearing from the Spirit and Scriptures? And then lastly, what is your sin and your secrets? Yeah. It's been a powerful thing to have a weekly rhythm where I'm not only, confessing one to another, but I'm having to really, like you were talking about earlier, reflect on, what were the things this week? So often we can move through our weeks and just not even take the time to slow down.
Reflect enough.
Yes.
And then we just keep repeating the same dysfunctional patterns.
Yes.
Yes. There is something, Shelbi, about meeting regularly with a trustworthy group of people or person. So I think about my discipleship band, and one of the guys in that band, we aim for a weekly hike and on a day off, and we just go and then having a set of questions, which sounds a little like artificial and awkward, but it is so helpful to have somebody ask you those questions every week. How's your soul? What were your struggles? What were your failures? Do you have any sin to confess? Do you have any secrets that you want to uncover?
And it really is that journey of coming out of hiding. We talked earlier about Adam and Eve. What do they do when they're confronted with that experience? They hide.
They go into hiding.
And I need that regular rhythm and structure so that I can slowly
and poignant questions. Otherwise, what I find is I only work up the courage to confess when it's really, really bad. And I don't ever really attune or attend to the driving undercurrents of the heart, which may manifest as sin or may get kind of stopped by the grace of God before I sin, but they're still there in my heart, unhealed and not uprooted. And that's where this regular practice, it's a real sad, if you know church history, confession early on became woven into the design of church structure. And then, like many good things, it got kind of warped and weird over time. And so the reformers kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater, and confession became, we have this liturgy at church where we say sorry to God in our mind. And not a bad thing, but that power of on a regular basis, I go talk to somebody and I was lost. And so I think what Wesley was trying to do in Methodism and what we're learning from him and others is how do you actually build a structure into your relational life and community where there's just a healthy, normal, natural way for this stuff to surface in a loving, safe place.
Yes.
Practicing the Way is a crowd-funded nonprofit made possible by The Circle and other givers. The Circle is a group of people from all over the world who believe deeply in the work of spiritual formation and discipleship. They give monthly to see formation integrated into the church at large. My name is Steve. I'm married to Bonnie Jo, and we live in Pinehurst, North Carolina. We are a part of this community.
We give joyfully to Practicing the Way, not only because of the profound impact it is having in the global church, but also because of the way it is enriching our local church community and our own apprenticeship to Jesus. To join us and others in the Circle, or to share a one-time gift, please visit practicingtheway.org/give.
Well, a lot of what we're talking about is easier said than done, but
Yes.
we need to take a step, right? If we want to begin to receive the healing from our shame, we got to take a step. And so this week, the exercise is to actually find a confessor and confess sin. And so let's talk a little bit about that. I'm thinking specifically, who do you look for in a confessor?
Well, I love that language personally. Many streams of the Church of Jesus down through 2,000 years of church history and around the world today have used that language of a confessor. And often people may think of a priest or a formal office in the church, and that is a legitimate way to do that.
Yeah.
But for those of us not in a church tradition like that, it doesn't need to mean that. It can just mean like a trustworthy friend that you get coffee with once a week.
Yeah.
And if that's too much of a leap for you to like go confess your sin, then a small step might be get coffee with a friend and just be a bit more honest than normal about something that is hard in your life right now.
Yeah.
If that, and just, again, take the next step in building intimacy and just even testing out the waters. Is this a safe enough person? But ideally, all of us should have a person or 2 or 3 people, but one is enough at some level, who we can kind of tell everything to, and there's no secrets, and we know that they will walk with us, and they will journey with us, and they will help us on our spiritual journey to Jesus. I mean, the last thing we should try to overcome by ourselves is sin.
Right.
It is way too powerful to just try to take willpower plus good Christian theology and muscle your way through. Good luck with that.
Right.
We heal together or we do not heal at all.
So good.
So I think, this is a leap for a lot of people. And so take the next step. But I think the goal is, do you have 1 to 3 people that you are regularly unburdening your mistakes, your temptations, your struggles, again, sin done by you and to you and around you, to that person. And are you, and when you name this stuff, even if it's not something that you actually did wrong, just naming temptations.
Right.
And Freud was wrong about almost everything, apparently. But one thing he was really right on is whatever it is about ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge, we give the most power to. So just the act, even if we haven't done anything wrong, of acknowledging what a part of our heart wants to have an affair, to lie, to cheat, to buy something we don't need, and just even acknowledging a part of us wants it. We just, in naming that to another person, it is just defanged of so much of its poisonous power.
Yeah.
So I cannot recommend enough.
So good.
Build a trustworthy relationship with somebody, and when the relationship is ready to hold it, confess.
Yes. I'm thinking about the person who might be listening to this, and they've taken the risk, because there's a risk that is required in doing that. And maybe, we're talking a lot about the healing that comes from confession.
Yeah, wounding comes from it if it goes bad.
Exactly. So that's who I'm thinking about, who has gone into that space and it's heaped on more shame. Maybe what encouragement would you have to offer someone who that's been their experience?
Oh, I would just say I'm so sorry if that has been your experience. And intuitively in your body that was not right. And that wrong version, at some level, there is a right version.
Yes.
And so I would just say, you will never heal by avoiding that for the rest of your life. You will always and only ever heal by moving toward the healthy, good version of that, and move at your own pace. And again, that may be just very slow, and you have to build trust with people.
Right.
And what you find is some people are not trustworthy, or some people are trustworthy to a level. I want to just be a vulnerable person, but I've learned the hard way. I need to be vulnerable in like a trust appropriate way.
Yeah.
Some people you can be like, how was your week? It's like, a bit of a rough week, but I'm doing okay. That's as deep as I'm going.
Yeah.
Other people, it's like, oh my gosh, you go right into the deep wound,
Yes.
but that is a trustworthy person.
Right.
And how do you know? You just slowly test the waters and you begin to see, is this a trustworthy person? And I think I'm saying this too much with the emphasis on the other person. Am I a trustworthy person?
It's good.
We want trust and vulnerability from others. You know, it's Brene Brown said, vulnerability is the first thing I look for in you and the last thing I want to give to you myself.
Yes.
So are we a trustworthy person? Do we gossip? Do we betray confidence? Do we go around and whisper when people confess to us? Do we judge them? Do we get anxious and throw Christian theology at them and not let them process their pain? Or are we trustworthy?
Wow.
So don't point a finger, just slowly move toward being more vulnerable and more trustworthy and just test relationships and move at a healthy pace. That might be an inch at a time. That's okay.
That's okay. Friends, thanks so much for joining us for episode 3 of the community series. If you found this episode helpful or impactful, we'd be so grateful if you'd consider sharing it with a few people in your community. For our next and our final episode of this season, we'll have an interview with Pastor David Kim. David Kim is the author of Made to Belong, which is our recommended reading for this practice. And we're going to take some time to explore a few remaining practices for deepening our relationships that we most tend to avoid. So we hope you'll join us for that final episode. And now I'd love to bless you as you go. May God, who sets the solitary in families, make you into a family. May he bind your hearts together in his love. May he heal you, grow you, and form you into a people of love.